Officer Michael Torres froze mid-stride, his coffee cup suspended inches from his lips as Scout's ears snapped to rigid attention. The German Shepherd's amber eyes locked onto the darkened apartment window 3 stories above, his massive frame trembling with an intensity Michael had never witnessed. It wasn't just another domestic disturbance call. This was something far worse. Scout's guttural whine shattered the Austin night silence, followed by the crash of a chair hitting a wall somewhere in the darkness above. A child's muffled scream pierced through brick and mortar, freezing the blood in Michael's veins. Emma Wilson pressed her small body deeper into the bedroom closet, counting Derek's approaching footsteps the way other children counted sheep. 14 steps from the kitchen. Always 14. But tonight, the footsteps stopped at 13. "Unit 47, we need immediate backup at Riverside Commons," Michael barked into his radio, his free hand instinctively moving to his weapon. What evil had been hiding behind those cheerful yellow curtains? And how long did they have before it was too late? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The Riverside Commons apartment complex stood like a monument to working-class dreams deferred, its faded brick facade hiding secrets behind every window. In Unit 3B, 10-year-old Emma Wilson had learned to make herself invisible, a skill no child should ever master. Her blonde hair hung in careful tangles around her pale face, gray eyes that had seen too much for someone who still slept with a teddy bear named Mr. Buttons. Emma's father, David Wilson, had been her entire world until a drunk driver took him away 4 years ago. She still remembered his calloused hands teaching her to draw, his laugh that filled their small kitchen, the way he called her little artist when she showed him her crayon masterpieces. After his death, her mother Linda had fallen into a darkness that seemed to swallow everything good about their life together. Linda Wilson, at 35, carried herself with the exhausted grace of someone who had learned to smile while drowning. As an emergency room nurse at St. David's Hospital, she saved lives by day and came home to a life that felt beyond saving. Her marriage to Derek Morrison 8 months ago had been an act of desperation disguised as hope, a belief that any father figure was better than none for Emma. Derek Morrison filled doorways with his presence, 6 feet of coiled tension wrapped in the uniform of a night security guard. His sandy hair was always perfectly combed, his jaw perpetually shadowed with stubble that made him look distinguished to strangers and dangerous to those who knew better. The Marine tattoo on his forearm told a story of honor and service, but the scars on his knuckles whispered different tales. 3 blocks away, Officer Michael Torres adjusted his rearview mirror as Scout paced restlessly in the back of their patrol car. At 38, Michael had learned to trust his partner's instincts more than his own. The German Shepherd's black and tan coat gleamed under the streetlights, but it was his amber eyes that told the real story. Intelligence born from trauma, loyalty forged in mutual rescue. Scout had been Michael's salvation after his wife Maria died of cancer 2 years ago, leaving him to raise 11-year-old Sophia with help from his mother. The dog understood loss in ways that transcended species, having survived horrors in an illegal fighting ring before Michael found him bloodied and broken in a police raid. They had healed each other, cop and canine, creating a partnership that extended far beyond their official duties. Tonight, that partnership would be tested in ways neither could imagine. The military photograph fell from Emma's trembling hands, its glass frame shattering across the hardwood floor like 1,000 tiny accusations. She had only been trying to dust the mantelpiece, following Linda's whispered instructions to keep everything perfect, when Derek came home from his security shift. But now the image of Derek and his younger brother Marcus, both in marine dress blues, lay fractured at her feet. Derek's reaction was immediate and volcanic. his face drained of color as he stared at the broken glass surrounding Marcus's smiling face, and Emma watched in terror as something fundamental shifted behind his eyes. She had seen Derek angry before, the controlled fury that came with thrown dishes and slammed doors. But this was different. This was the look of a man seeing ghosts. "Marcus," Derek whispered, dropping to his knees among the glass shards. His hands shook as he tried to piece the photograph back together, cutting his fingers on the sharp edges. Blood mixed with the fractured image of two brothers who would never see each other again. "You don't understand what you've done." Linda rushed from the kitchen, her nurse's instincts immediately cataloging the scene. Broken glass, blood, her husband's 1,000-yard stare, and Emma frozen in terror by the fireplace. She had seen this look before in the emergency room, in the eyes of combat veterans when the past collided violently with the present. "Derek, honey, it's just a picture," Linda said softly, reaching toward him with practiced calm. "We can get it fixed. We can—" His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with enough force to leave bruises. "Just a picture?" His voice was barely human now, a growl that seemed to come from some dark place deep inside his chest. "That's my brother." "My baby brother who died because I wasn't good enough to save him." Emma backed toward the hallway, her artistic eye automatically noting details that would later haunt her drawings. The way Derek's knuckles went white against Linda's pale skin. How the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows made the blood on the broken glass look like rubies, the sound her mother made. Not quite a gasp, not quite a sob. "You're hurting me," Linda whispered. But Derek seemed not to hear. He was somewhere else now. Somewhere hot and sandy, where IEDs exploded and 19-year-old brothers called for help that would never come. "He was supposed to come home," Derek continued, his grip tightening. "Supposed to meet his nephews. Supposed to dance at my wedding. But he's gone. And there are still children in this world who get to live when Marcus doesn't get to breathe." The logic was twisted, broken like the photograph. But Emma understood with the terrible clarity that comes to children who learn to read danger in adult faces. In Derek's fractured mind, she had become a symbol of everything wrong with a world that let innocent people die while others lived undeserving lives. Linda tried once more to reach him. "Derek, please." "Emma didn't mean—" "Emma." The way he said her name made her blood turn to ice water. Slowly, deliberately, Derek rose to his feet, glass crunching under his boots. His eyes found hers across the room, and she saw her death written there in the space where sanity used to live. 10 years old. Same age Marcus was when our father left us. Same age he was when he promised to follow me anywhere. Emma ran. She heard Linda scream behind her, heard Derek's heavy footsteps on the stairs, but her legs carried her with the desperate speed of prey fleeing a predator. Her bedroom door slammed shut behind her, the flimsy lock clicking into place, a barrier about as substantial as tissue paper against Derek's rage. Outside her window, 3 blocks away, Scout's head snapped up in the patrol car. The German shepherd's nostrils flared, catching something on the evening breeze that made every muscle in his powerful body go rigid. Fear had a scent, sharp and metallic, and trauma had a frequency that only those who had survived it could truly hear. Michael noticed his partner's behavior immediately. "What is it, boy? What do you smell?" Scout's response was a low, urgent whine that seemed to come from his very soul. In the apartment above, Emma pressed her back against her bedroom door and listened to Derek's boots climbing the stairs, each step a countdown to something she couldn't name but understood with terrible certainty. Linda's voice drifted up from the living room, pleading and desperate. "Derek, please don't hurt her. She's just a baby." But Derek Morrison was no longer hearing the voice of his wife. He was hearing the echoes of his brother's last words, carried on desert winds and mixed with the acrid smoke of burning vehicles. Don't let me die alone, Derek. Don't let me die. Tonight, he would make sure no child suffered the way Marcus had suffered. Tonight, he would grant them all the mercy he couldn't give his brother. Derek's fist connected with Emma's bedroom door, splintering the thin wood around the cheap lock. The sound echoed through the apartment like a gunshot, and in that moment, everything changed. Emma pressed herself against her closet door, clutching Mr. Buttons to her chest, watching through the crack as Derek's boot finished what his fist had started. "There's nowhere to run, sweetheart." Derek's voice carried the eerie calm of a man who had crossed a line from which there was no return. "Uncle Derek is going to help you join Marcus. You'll like Marcus. He was about your age when he learned that this world isn't safe for children." 3 blocks away, Scout's behavior escalated from restlessness to outright panic. The German Shepherd threw himself against the patrol car's partition, his claws scraping frantically at the metal mesh. Michael had never seen his partner like this. Scout was trembling, whining, and pawing at the window as if trying to claw his way through glass and distance to reach something only he could sense. "Easy, boy," Michael said, but his own pulse quickened as he noticed the domestic disturbance reports on his computer screen. 6 calls to this address in the past 3 months, all hang-ups, all logged as welfare checks negative. The pattern was unmistakable to anyone who had worked domestic violence cases long enough. Back in the apartment, Linda made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Instead of running, instead of calling 911, she followed Derek up the stairs. Not to stop him. She had learned months ago that stopping Derek when he was in this state was impossible, but to witness, to remember, to become the living testament to whatever was about to happen. Emma found herself thinking of her grandmother Eleanor, locked away in Sunset Manor, probably watching her evening game shows and wondering why her granddaughter never called anymore. Derek had forbidden contact with Eleanor months ago, claiming the old woman was filling Emma's head with nonsense about family loyalty. Now Emma understood what her grandmother had been trying to tell her in those brief, stolen phone conversations before Derek changed their number. "She sees through people," Eleanor had whispered during their last call. "Always has, even when she was little. If she's scared of someone, there's a good reason." Derek stepped through the ruined doorway, and Emma saw her death in his eyes. But something else, too. A terrible kind of love, twisted and broken like the photograph downstairs. He genuinely believed he was saving her, and that realization was more terrifying than simple hatred would have been. "I know you're scared," Derek said, kneeling down to her level with the practiced patience of someone who had comforted dying soldiers. "Marcus was scared, too, at the end, but I stayed with him. I held his hand while he bled out in that desert, and I promised him I'd never let another child suffer the way he suffered." Linda appeared in the doorway behind him, her face pale but resolute. In her hand was her cell phone, and Emma caught a glimpse of the screen. 911 was dialed, but not yet sent. Linda's finger hovered over the call button, her entire body shaking with the weight of the decision she was about to make. "Derek," Linda said softly, "remember what Dr. Harrison said about the episodes? About how they get worse when you stop taking your medication?" Derek's head turned slowly toward his wife, and Emma saw confusion flicker across his features. For just a moment, the fog of trauma and rage lifted, and he looked like the man Linda had fallen in love with, lost, hurt, but not yet beyond redemption. "The pills made me forget Marcus," Derek whispered. "Made me forget his last words, his face. I can't forget Marcus, Linda. He's all I have left of who I used to be." But the moment passed, and the darkness returned to his eyes with renewed fury. "You called them, didn't you? You called the police." Linda's denial died on her lips as Derek's hand closed around her throat. The phone clattered to the floor, the call never made, and Emma watched her mother's face turn purple as Derek lifted her off the ground with one arm. "Marcus trusted me," Derek snarled, his grip tightening, "and I failed him. But I won't fail these children." I won't let them grow up in a world that chews up little boys and spits them out in pieces." Emma's artistic mind, even in terror, catalogued the scene. Her mother's feet dangling 6 inches off the floor, Derek's marine tattoo bulging as his muscles strained, the way afternoon light from the hallway window cast everything in golden amber, like an old photograph from someone else's nightmare. Outside, Michael made the decision that would define his career. Against protocol, against training, against every rule in the book, he released Scout from the patrol car without backup, without a warrant, without anything but a dog's instinct and a cop's gut feeling that time was running out. Scout hit the apartment building's front door like a furry missile. His 85 pounds of trained muscle and protective fury focused on a single goal: reach the source of that scent before it was too late. The building's security door, old and poorly maintained, gave way under his assault with a crash that shook the entire first floor. Emma heard the sound, something wild and powerful entering their world, and for the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope. Whatever was coming up those stairs, it was coming for Derek, not for her. Derek heard it too. He dropped Linda, who crumpled gasping to the floor, and turned toward the hallway with the calculating alertness of a soldier under fire. "Someone's in the building!" But it wasn't someone. It was Scout, and he was coming. The sound of Scout's claws scraping against the apartment building's stairwell echoed like thunder in Derek's fractured mind. Each scratch, each panting breath, each powerful stride brought back memories he had spent 3 years trying to bury beneath alcohol and rage. In Afghanistan, the military working dogs had been their salvation, 4-legged angels who could smell IEDs buried in the sand, who could track insurgents through the mountains, who had saved more Marine lives than any weapon in their arsenal. But dogs had also been there when Marcus died. Derek's hands trembled as he pulled Linda to her feet, using her body as a shield between himself and whatever was coming up those stairs. She gasped for air, her throat already showing the purple fingerprints of his grip, but her eyes remained focused on Emma, who was still pressed against the closet door with Mr. Buttons clutched to her chest. "Mommy," Emma whispered, the word barely audible, but carrying the weight of every prayer she had ever whispered into her pillow at night. The sound of Scout reaching their floor was unmistakable, a hurricane of muscle and determination that made the entire hallway vibrate. Derek knew that sound, had heard it countless times in the desert when the dogs were tracking. This wasn't just any dog. This was a trained killer, and it was coming for him. Michael Torres took the stairs 3 at a time, his radio crackling with static as he called for backup that was still 10 minutes away. His service weapon was drawn, but his mind was focused on Scout's behavior pattern. In 3 years of partnership, he had never seen the German Shepherd break protocol like this. Scout was trained to wait for commands, to follow procedure, to protect his handler above all else. But tonight, something primal had overridden that training. Emma's artistic mind, even in terror, noticed the way the afternoon light shifted as a large shadow blocked the hallway window. Scout appeared in her bedroom doorway like something out of a storybook. Not the friendly family pet kind of storybook, but the ancient kind where wolves could be either saviors or destroyers, depending on whose story was being told. The German Shepherd was magnificent and terrifying, his black and tan coat rippling with muscles honed by years of police work. His amber eyes locked onto Derek with an intelligence that was almost human, reading the scene in seconds. The bruises on Linda's throat, Emma's obvious terror, the smell of violence that clung to the air like smoke. Derek's military training kicked in automatically. He assessed the threat. 85 pounds of trained attack dog, probably police or military, definitely hostile. His grip tightened on Linda's arm as he calculated angles, escape routes, tactical advantages. But there was also something else in his assessment, something that made his breath catch in his throat. The dog looked exactly like Rex, the Belgian Malinois who had been Marcus's best friend during their deployment. Rex, who had died trying to dig Marcus out of the rubble after the IED exploded. Rex, whose whimpering had been the last sound Derek heard before the medevac helicopter finally arrived. "Easy, boy," Derek said, his voice automatically taking on the tone he had used with Rex. "I know you think you're helping, but you don't understand what's happening here." Scout's response was a low growl that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. The sound was primal, ancient, the voice of every dog who had ever stood between a child and danger. His hackles rose, transforming him from domestic companion into something wild and protective. Linda made her move then, twisting out of Derek's grip with the desperate strength of a mother protecting her young. But Derek was faster, his hand shooting out to catch her wrist, spinning her back against his chest. The movement put Emma directly in Scout's line of sight, and the little girl's gray eyes met the dog's amber ones across the small room. "Help me," Emma whispered, the words meant for Scout, but heard by everyone in the room. Michael reached the apartment doorway just as Scout made his decision. The German Shepherd launched himself across the room with controlled fury, not attacking blindly, but moving with the precision of a weapon guided by love. Derek tried to use Linda as a human shield, but Scout was too well trained, too intelligent. The dog's trajectory took him low, his powerful jaws clamping down on Derek's left leg just above the ankle. The sound Derek made was inhuman, part scream, part roar, part sob. He crashed to the floor, taking Linda with him, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle as Scout's jaws applied exactly enough pressure to immobilize without causing permanent damage. The dog's training had taken over, transforming rage into surgical precision. "Austin police! Nobody move!" Michael's voice cut through the chaos as he entered the room, his weapon trained on Derek, but his eyes taking in the full scope of the situation. Emma still pressed against the closet, Linda gasping on the floor with bruises blooming across her throat, Derek writhing under Scout's controlled assault. But it was the look in Derek's eyes that stopped Michael cold. He had seen that look before in his own mirror during the dark months after Maria died. It was the look of a man who had been carrying death inside him for so long that he had forgotten how to live. "He killed Marcus," Derek gasped, looking at Scout with a mixture of terror and recognition. "Just like Rex tried to save Marcus, but I wouldn't let him. I pulled him away from the rubble because I was afraid of more explosions. I let my brother die because I was a coward." The confession hung in the air like a toxic cloud, poisoning everything it touched. Linda stared at her husband in horror, finally understanding that his rage had never been about PTSD or medication or bad days at work. It had been about guilt so profound it had twisted his soul into something unrecognizable. Scout released Derek's leg but remained positioned between him and Emma, a living barrier that radiated protective intent. The dog's intelligence was evident in every line of his body. He understood exactly what was happening and had appointed himself Emma's guardian angel. Emma crept forward slowly, her small hand extended toward Scout's massive head. The German Shepherd's demeanor changed instantly, the warrior becoming gentle as her fingers touched his fur. He lowered himself to the ground, allowing her to bury her face in his neck while keeping his eyes fixed on Derek. "I wanted to save them all," Derek whispered, his voice breaking as sirens wailed in the distance. "Every child I see, I think of Marcus. I think about how the world took him when he was young and innocent, and I want to save them from having to grow up and face what he faced." Michael holstered his weapon as backup officers thundered up the stairs, but he kept his attention focused on Derek's face. The man wasn't evil, he realized. He was broken, shattered by survivor's guilt into something dangerous and tragic. But understanding didn't equal forgiveness, especially not when a 10-year-old girl was still trembling in the corner. "Marcus wouldn't want this," Michael said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had also lost people he loved. He wouldn't want you to hurt innocent children in his name." Derek's laugh was bitter and broken. Marcus was innocent too, and the world killed him anyway. Linda struggled to her feet, her hand touching her bruised throat as she looked at the man she had married, the stranger she had been living with, the monster who had hidden behind Marcus's memory to justify the unjustifiable. "You're not saving anyone," she whispered. "You're just creating more victims." The first backup officer appeared in the doorway, weapon drawn, taking in the scene with professional eyes. Derek Morrison lying on the floor with a leg wound, a German shepherd standing guard over a little girl, a woman with obvious signs of strangulation, and Officer Torres with his hands raised to show he was in control. "Domestic violence situation under control," Michael reported into his radio. "Need paramedics for multiple victims and a psychiatric hold for the suspect." But even as he spoke, Michael knew that control was an illusion. Derek Morrison might be going to jail, but the damage he had done to this family would ripple outward for years to come. Emma would carry scars both visible and invisible. Linda would question every relationship decision she had ever made. And somewhere in a nursing home, an elderly woman named Eleanor Patterson was about to learn that her worst fears about her granddaughter's safety had been justified. Scout remained at Emma's side as the paramedics arrived, his presence the only constant in a world that had just been turned upside down. The dog seemed to understand that his job wasn't finished yet, that this little girl would need protection long after the handcuffs clicked shut around Derek's wrists. As they loaded Derek onto a stretcher, he looked back at Scout one final time. "You're just like Rex," he said, his voice filled with something that might have been admiration if it wasn't so tainted with madness. "He tried to save Marcus, too. But some people can't be saved." Emma buried her face deeper in Scout's fur, breathing in his warm, safe scent as the chaos swirled around them. She didn't know it yet, but in this moment, her life was being divided into before and after. Before Scout, when she had faced her demons alone, and after Scout, when she had learned that sometimes angels really do have 4 legs and wet noses. The real story was just beginning. The emergency room at St. David's Hospital buzzed with controlled chaos as Emma was wheeled through the automatic doors, Scout trotting beside the gurney despite multiple attempts by security to remove him. Michael Torres had made it clear that separating the dog from the child was not an option, flashing his badge and citing Scout as essential evidence in an ongoing investigation. It was a stretch of protocol, but no one was willing to argue with a police officer whose canine partner had just prevented a potential homicide. Dr. Sarah Chen, the attending pediatric physician, took one look at Emma's pale face and the massive German shepherd refusing to leave her side, and made a decision that would later be questioned by hospital administration but praised by child psychologists. "The dog stays," she announced to her nursing staff. "I've seen enough trauma cases to know that removing her support system right now could cause more harm than any policy violation." Emma's physical injuries were surprisingly minimal. Bruises on her arms where Derek had grabbed her, some scratches from the broken glass, and the psychological shock that manifested in her refusal to speak or let go of Scout's fur. But it was Linda's injuries that painted the clearer picture of the evening's violence. The bruising around her throat was severe enough to require CT scans to rule out tracheal damage, and her wrists bore the distinct fingerprint patterns of someone who had been grabbed and shaken repeatedly. While the medical team worked, Detective Maria Santos arrived to begin the complex process of documenting what would become one of Austin's most disturbing domestic violence cases of the year. Santos was a 20-year veteran who specialized in crimes against children, a woman whose own childhood had been marked by violence that she now channeled into protecting others. She took one look at Emma clinging to Scout and immediately understood the dynamic at play. "The dog saved her life," Michael explained quietly as they watched through the observation window. "I've never seen Scout react like that to anything. It was like he could smell the danger before any of us knew what was happening." Santos nodded, making notes in her tablet. "We'll need to document that. Canine behavioral evidence is becoming more admissible in court, especially in cases involving domestic violence. Dogs can detect stress hormones and fear pheromones that humans miss entirely." As if responding to the conversation about him, Scout lifted his massive head and looked directly at the two officers through the glass. His amber eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost human, and both Santos and Michael felt the uncanny sensation of being evaluated by something far more perceptive than they had initially realized. Dr. Chen emerged from the examination room with a grim expression. "Physically, Emma will be fine, but psychologically—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "This child has been living in a state of chronic fear for months, possibly longer. Her stress responses are off the charts, and she's exhibiting signs of complex trauma that suggest ongoing abuse rather than a single incident." The revelation hit Michael like a physical blow. He had responded to 6 domestic disturbance calls at the Morrison residence over the past 3 months, all of them resulting in welfare checks negative because no one had answered the door and there were no visible signs of violence. Standard protocol dictated that without evidence or cooperation from the residents, police couldn't force entry. Now he realized that Emma and Linda had been prisoners in their own home while he had been following procedures that ultimately protected their abuser. Linda's examination revealed an even more disturbing pattern. The bruising on her throat was fresh, but Dr. Chen found evidence of older injuries that had healed: rib fractures consistent with being grabbed and shaken, nerve damage in her left wrist that suggested repeated twisting, and psychological trauma that had left her in a state of learned helplessness that made her complicit in her own daughter's abuse. "Mrs. Morrison," Dr. Chen said gently, using the name Linda had given at admission, "I need you to understand that what happened tonight was not an isolated incident. Your injuries tell a story of systematic abuse that's been escalating for months." Linda's response was barely audible. "His name isn't Morrison." "It's Derek Morrison, but Emma and I are Wilsons. I kept our real name because—" She trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. Detective Santos leaned forward. "Because some part of you knew this day would come?" The simple question broke through Linda's carefully constructed denial, like a dam bursting. The tears came in waves, months of suppressed terror and guilt pouring out in great, shuddering sobs that seemed to shake her entire body. "I thought I could protect her," she whispered between gasps. "I thought if I kept him happy, if I watched for the warning signs, if I could just be perfect enough—" "Mrs. Wilson," Santos said firmly, "there is no such thing as being perfect enough to prevent an abuser from abusing. That's not how it works." Through the observation window, they could see Emma finally speaking, not to the medical staff or social workers, but to Scout. She was whispering into his ear with the intensity of someone sharing state secrets, and the German Shepherd's response was to press closer to her, offering his solid warmth as an anchor in the storm of adult voices and institutional procedures swirling around her. Michael found himself thinking about his own daughter, Sophia, safe at his mother's house, probably finishing her homework and complaining about having to go to bed on time. The contrast between Sophia's normal 10-year-old problems and Emma's fight for survival made him physically sick. How many other children were out there, hidden behind closed doors, living in terror while the adults around them followed procedures and respected privacy, and failed to see the signs that were probably obvious in hindsight? The social services team arrived an hour later, led by Jessica Martinez, a caseworker who had been handling high-risk family situations for 15 years. Martinez had seen every variation of abuse and neglect that humans could inflict on children, but something about this case, the way Emma clung to a dog she had just met, the way Linda seemed genuinely shocked by her own survival, suggested layers of complexity that would take months to unravel. "Where's her family?" Martinez asked, reviewing the preliminary case file. "Grandparents, aunts, uncles, someone who can provide emergency placement while we sort this out?" Linda's voice was hoarse from her throat injuries, but her words carried clearly through the hospital room. "My mother, Eleanor Patterson. She lives at Sunset Manor, the assisted living facility on Riverside Drive. Derek cut off contact months ago, said she was interfering with our family unity." The mention of Eleanor Patterson caused Detective Santos to pause in her note-taking. Eleanor Patterson, the retired teacher who used to work with at-risk youth? "You know her?" Linda asked, surprise flickering through her exhaustion. "Know her? She's called the department a dozen times in the past 6 months, insisting that her granddaughter was in danger. We classified her as a concerned senior citizen with possible dementia-related paranoia." Santos felt heat rise in her cheeks as the implications hit her. She wasn't paranoid. She was right. The room fell silent, except for the soft sound of Emma's voice talking to Scout and the mechanical beeping of medical monitors. Each adult in that room was confronting their own version of failure. Michael's adherence to protocol over instinct, Linda's choice of protection over action, Santos's dismissal of an elderly woman's concerns, Dr. Chen's focus on treating symptoms rather than investigating causes. But Scout had followed his instincts, had broken protocol, had refused to dismiss what his senses were telling him about danger and fear and a child who needed saving. In a system designed to protect the vulnerable, it had taken a dog to actually provide protection. Emma's whispered conversation with Scout was interrupted by the arrival of a familiar figure in the doorway. Eleanor Patterson, 73 years old and formidable despite her walker, had somehow convinced a taxi driver to bring her from Sunset Manor to the hospital in the middle of the night. Her gray hair was disheveled, her house dress thrown on over pajamas, but her eyes were sharp and filled with a fury that made everyone in the room step back. "Where is he?" Eleanor demanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 40 years managing classrooms full of difficult teenagers. "Where is the man who hurt my granddaughter?" Emma looked up at the sound of her grandmother's voice, and for the first time since the ordeal began, her face showed something other than fear. "Grandma Eleanor?" "I'm here, sweetheart," Eleanor said, moving toward the hospital bed with surprising speed despite the walker. "Grandma's here, and that man will never hurt you again." Scout, displaying the emotional intelligence that made German Shepherds exceptional therapy dogs, seemed to understand that reinforcements had arrived. He moved slightly to one side, making room for Eleanor while maintaining his protective position. When the elderly woman's hand touched Emma's forehead, the little girl finally let go of Scout's fur and allowed herself to be held by someone who had been trying to save her all along. The reunion was interrupted by Detective Santos's radio crackling to life. "Detective Santos, we have an update on suspect Derek Morrison. He's asking to make a confession." The Travis County Jail's interrogation room felt smaller than its actual dimensions, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows that made Derek Morrison look older than his 42 years. He sat hunched over the metal table, his left leg elevated and wrapped in medical bandages where Scout's teeth had found their mark. The painkillers they had given him at the hospital had dulled the physical pain, but seemed to have stripped away the psychological barriers that had kept his confession locked inside for 3 years. Detective Santos sat across from him, her recording equipment humming quietly between them like a mechanical witness to what she suspected would be one of the most disturbing confessions of her career. Derek's hands shook as he reached for the paper cup of water she had provided, and she noticed the way his eyes kept darting to the corners of the room as if expecting threats to emerge from the shadows. "Tell me about Marcus," Santos said simply, her voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone who had learned that the most horrific truths often emerged from the gentlest questions. Derek's reaction was immediate and visceral. His entire body began to shake, and when he spoke, his voice sounded like it was coming from somewhere far away. Marcus was 19 when he died. 19 years old, and he followed me into hell because I promised to keep him safe. The story that emerged over the next hour was more complex and more tragic than anyone had anticipated. Marcus Morrison hadn't died in an IED explosion as Derek had claimed. He had died of a heroin overdose in a dirty apartment in El Paso, Texas, 2 months after being discharged from the Marines with PTSD and chronic pain from a training accident that had nothing to do with combat heroics. "He came home broken," Derek continued, his words coming faster now, as if a dam had burst inside him. "Not from war, but from falling off a truck during a routine training exercise. Blew out 3 discs in his back, got hooked on the pain pills they gave him, and when the VA cut him off..." Derek's voice trailed into silence. Detective Santos waited, knowing that interrupting now would be like stopping a river mid-flow. This was the kind of confession that could only happen once, in exactly this moment, under exactly these circumstances. "I found him on the bathroom floor of his apartment," Derek whispered. Needle still in his arm, eyes open, staring at nothing. He'd been dead for 2 days before his landlord called me. 2 days. And I was in Dallas living my perfect life with my perfect job and my perfect girlfriend, telling everyone my brother was a war hero while he was dying alone. The truth was devastating in its ordinariness. No dramatic battlefield sacrifice, no heroic last stand against enemy forces. Just a young man who had slipped through the cracks of a system designed to help veterans, dying in the most preventable way possible, while his older brother remained oblivious to his pain. "I created the Afghanistan story because I couldn't live with the truth," Derek continued. "I couldn't tell people that my baby brother died of an overdose in a roach-infested apartment while I was playing house with Linda. So I made him a hero. I gave him the death he deserved instead of the death he got." Santos felt a chill run down her spine as she began to understand the true scope of Derek's psychological break. "And Emma? How does Emma fit into this?" Derek's laugh was bitter and broken. "Emma was the same age Marcus was when our father left us. 10 years old, innocent, trusting. Every time I looked at her, I saw him. I saw what he was before the world got its claws into him, and I thought..." He paused, struggling with words that seemed to physically hurt him to speak. "I thought if I could save her from growing up, from facing what Marcus faced, if I could give her a quick, merciful end instead of letting life slowly destroy her." "You thought killing her would be an act of mercy." "I thought it would be love," Derek whispered, and the genuine anguish in his voice made Santos's stomach turn. This wasn't the calculated cruelty of a predator. This was the twisted logic of a mind that had broken under the weight of grief and guilt until mercy and murder had become indistinguishable. The recording device captured every word, every pause, every broken breath that would later be dissected by prosecutors and defense attorneys and court-appointed psychiatrists. But in that moment, Santos found herself thinking about Emma Wilson, still in the hospital room with her grandmother and a German shepherd who had somehow sensed the danger that trained professionals had missed. "What about Linda?" Santos asked. "Did you plan to kill her too?" Derek's head snapped up, and for the first time during the confession his eyes focused clearly on the detective. "Linda? No. Linda was supposed to understand. She was supposed to see that what I was doing was necessary." His voice took on a desperate quality, as if he could still convince someone that his actions made sense. "She's a nurse. She sees death every day. She knows that sometimes, when someone is suffering, the kindest thing is to let them go." But even as he spoke, Derek seemed to realize how hollow his justification sounded. The fog of delusion was lifting, and in its place came a horror that was almost physical in its intensity. "Oh, God," he whispered, his hands covering his face. "Oh, God, what did I almost do?" The breakdown that followed was complete and devastating. Derek Morrison, former Marine, former security guard, former stepfather, dissolved into something raw and broken that bore little resemblance to the man who had terrorized Emma and Linda for months. Santos had seen confessions before, had watched killers and rapists and child abusers try to explain away their actions, but this was different. This was a human soul collapsing under the weight of its own darkness. "I need help," Derek sobbed into his hands. "I've needed help for 3 years, but I was too proud, too scared, too stupid to ask for it. And now that little girl—" He looked up at Santos with eyes that seemed to have aged decades in the span of an hour. "She'll never feel safe again because of what I almost did to her." Santos turned off the recording device, knowing she had captured enough to ensure Derek would spend the rest of his life behind bars. But as she looked at the broken man across from her, she couldn't help thinking about all the other Marcus Morrisons out there, veterans falling through the cracks, families destroyed by untreated trauma, children paying the price for adults who couldn't find their way back from whatever hell they had visited. The real tragedy wasn't just what Derek had done, but what might have been prevented if someone had noticed his pain before it metastasized into something that nearly consumed an innocent family. The truth arrived in fragments over the following weeks, each revelation more devastating than the last. Detective Santos sat in the district attorney's office, surrounded by case files that painted a picture so disturbing it challenged everything she thought she knew about the Morrison case. What had begun as a domestic violence incident had metastasized into something far more sinister, a pattern of calculated predation that stretched across 3 states and nearly a decade. Derek Morrison isn't his real name, Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Chen announced to the assembled task force. His birth name is Derek Allen Walsh. He's been using variations of his identity for 8 years, always targeting single mothers with young children, always following the same pattern. The conference room fell silent as Chen clicked through a PowerPoint presentation that chronicled Derek's trail of destruction. Phoenix, Arizona, 2016. Jennifer Walsh, age 32, died in a house fire along with her 7-year-old daughter, Katie. The insurance investigation had been inconclusive, but Derek had collected $300,000 as the bereaved husband and stepfather. Albuquerque, New Mexico, 2018. Sarah Chen, age 29, died in what appeared to be a hiking accident, falling from a cliff while on a family camping trip with Derek and her 9-year-old son, Tyler. The boy had survived to tell a story that investigators dismissed as trauma-induced fantasy, claims that Derek had pushed his mother, that the fall hadn't been an accident. Derek collected another $250,000 in life insurance. "Jesus Christ," Michael Torres muttered from his seat at the back of the room, Scout lying quietly at his feet. The German Shepherd had become something of a fixture at the police station, his heroic actions having earned him honorary status, while the bureaucratic machinery decided his official fate. "How did he keep getting away with it?" Detective Santos answered, her voice tight with professional fury. "He was smart about it. Different states, different jurisdictions, no communication between agencies. He always waited at least a year before the accidents happened, long enough to establish himself as the grieving husband. And he chose his victims carefully, women who were isolated, financially vulnerable, desperate for stability. The pattern was sickeningly consistent. Derek would meet single mothers through online dating sites or support groups, presenting himself as a decorated veteran seeking to build a family. His military background, his fabricated stories about losing his brother in Afghanistan, his apparent devotion to taking care of someone else's children, it all created a perfect facade that masked his true intentions. Linda Wilson's case file revealed how thoroughly Derek had researched his victims. He knew about her husband David's death, about the life insurance settlement that had barely covered the funeral expenses in Emma's college fund. He knew about her struggles with depression, her isolation from family members who had grown tired of her grief. He had targeted her vulnerability with surgical precision. The truly disturbing part, Chen continued, is that the insurance fraud wasn't his primary motivation. The psychiatric evaluation suggests that Derek genuinely believed he was performing mercy killings. In his twisted logic, he saw himself as saving children from the pain of growing up in a cruel world. Dr. Amanda Foster, the forensic psychiatrist who had been evaluating Derek, joined the meeting via video conference from the state hospital where he was being held for competency evaluation. Her assessment was both clinical and chilling. Derek Morrison, or Walsh, suffers from severe PTSD, but not from combat trauma as he claimed. His psychological break stems from his brother Marcus's overdose death and Derek's profound guilt over his failure to intervene. However, this doesn't excuse his actions or make him incompetent to stand trial. He knew his actions were illegal. He simply believed they were morally justified. The room absorbed this information in heavy silence. Emma Wilson, still recovering in foster care with her grandmother Eleanor, had been living with a man who saw her death as an act of love. The thought made Michael's skin crawl, especially when he considered his own daughter Sophia and how easily any child could become a target for someone like Derek. But the most shocking revelation came from Detective Santos herself. "We found something else in Derek's belongings," she announced, pulling up a new slide that showed a photograph of a storage unit filled with boxes. He kept trophies, not just from the insurance claims, but personal items from each family. Jewelry from the mothers, toys from the children, photographs documenting their happy times together before the accidents. The boxes contained a horrifying museum of Derek's victims. Jennifer Walsh's engagement ring, Katie's stuffed elephant, home videos of family barbecues and birthday parties, Sarah Chen's hiking boots, Tyler's baseball glove, camping photos that had been taken just hours before Sarah's fatal fall, and most disturbing of all, items that had belonged to Linda and Emma. Photographs Derek had taken without their knowledge, copies of Emma's artwork that he had secretly made, even strands of hair that he had collected from their brushes. He was planning Emma's death as early as 3 months into his relationship with Linda, Santos continued. "We found detailed notes about her schedule, her favorite places to go, even research about water safety and drowning statistics. He was going to take her to Lake Austin, claimed she had fallen in while they were fishing together." The methodical nature of Derek's planning was perhaps the most chilling aspect of the entire case. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of rage. It was premeditated murder disguised as family bonding. The fact that Scout's intervention had prevented not just Emma's death, but what would have been Derek's most carefully orchestrated killing made the German Shepherd's heroism even more remarkable. Eleanor Patterson, now Emma's legal guardian, had been attending every briefing and court hearing despite her age and the emotional toll of learning about the danger her granddaughter had faced. Today, she sat in the front row, her weathered hands gripping the arms of her wheelchair, her eyes burning with a fury that seemed to fuel her despite her frail appearance. "I want to know about the other children," Eleanor said when given the opportunity to speak. "Tyler from New Mexico, Katie from Arizona. What happened to the survivors? Are they getting help?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. In the rush to build cases and assign blame, the collateral damage of Derek's crimes had been largely overlooked. Tyler Chen was now 14, living with relatives in Colorado, struggling with PTSD and survivor guilt. Katie Walsh had died with her mother in the Phoenix fire. There had been no survivors from that tragedy. "We're working with victim advocacy groups to provide support," Chen replied. but even she seemed to recognize how inadequate that response sounded. Michael found himself thinking about Emma's recovery process, which had been complicated by the media attention surrounding the case. Hero Dog Saves Girl from Killer Stepfather had become a national news story, complete with interview requests and book deal offers that Eleanor had firmly rejected. The attention was well-intentioned but traumatic for a child who was still learning to sleep through the night without nightmares. Scout, as if sensing the direction of Michael's thoughts, lifted his massive head and looked directly at his partner. The bond between them had deepened since the Morrison case, forged in the crucible of shared purpose that transcended the typical relationship between handler and K9. They had saved a life together, and that knowledge colored every interaction they had with the public, every domestic violence call they responded to, every suspicious behavior Scout flagged during their patrols. "There's one more thing," Detective Santos said as the meeting began to wind down. "Derek wants to see Emma. He's requesting a victim impact meeting as part of his plea negotiation." The room erupted in immediate objections, but Eleanor Patterson's voice cut through the chaos with surprising strength. "Absolutely not. That man has taken enough from my granddaughter. He doesn't get to use her for his own psychological absolution." Dr. Foster's voice crackled through the video conference speaker. "I actually agree with Mrs. Patterson. Derek's request appears to be motivated by his need to convince himself that Emma would understand and forgive his intentions. Granting this meeting would likely re-traumatize the victim while providing therapeutic benefit only to the perpetrator." As the task force members gathered their files and prepared to leave, Michael remained seated, Scout's warm weight against his leg serving as a reminder of why they did this work. Tomorrow, there would be other calls, other families in crisis, other children who needed someone to notice the signs that adults were trained to overlook. But tonight, Emma Wilson was safe in her grandmother's house, probably working on one of the art projects that had become her primary form of therapy. And Derek Morrison was in a cell where he would spend the rest of his life, his carefully constructed facade finally stripped away to reveal the monster beneath. Sometimes, Michael thought as he scratched behind Scout's ears, justice was exactly that simple. 6 months after Derek Morrison's sentencing to life without parole, Emma Wilson stood at the kitchen window of her grandmother's house on Elm Street, watching Scout chase butterflies in the backyard with the unbridled joy of a dog who had learned that not all excitement meant danger. The German Shepherd had officially retired from police duty due to the psychological trauma of the Morrison case, but his retirement had become Emma's salvation. Eleanor Patterson, now 74 and more spry than anyone had expected, hummed softly as she prepared Sunday dinner. The kitchen smelled of roast chicken and fresh bread, scents that had taken months for Emma to associate with safety rather than the anxiety of Derek's unpredictable moods. The house itself was a testament to healing. Bright yellow walls covered with Emma's artwork, photographs of 3 generations of Wilson women, and Scout's official commendation from the Austin Police Department hanging in a place of honor above the fireplace. "He's getting gray around his muzzle," Emma observed, her voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone of an 11-year-old who had learned to find comfort in small changes that marked the passage of safe time. Eleanor joined her at the window, her arms settling around Emma's shoulders with the easy affection that had taken months to rebuild. "Good dogs earn their gray hairs," she said softly. "Each one is a badge of honor for a life well lived." The transformation in Emma was remarkable to anyone who had known her during the dark months with Derek. Her blonde hair had grown longer, often braided with small flowers she and Eleanor picked from their garden. Her gray eyes, once clouded with fear, now sparkled with the curiosity natural to a child who felt secure enough to explore the world around her. Most importantly, She had begun to laugh again, not the careful, measured sounds she had made around Derek, but the uninhibited giggles that bubbled up when Scout performed his increasingly theatrical attempts to catch soap bubbles in the backyard. Linda Wilson's recovery had been more complicated. The guilt of her choices during her marriage to Derek had required extensive therapy, and her relationship with Emma remained a work in progress. But today marked a milestone. Her first unsupervised visit in 3 months, and the first time she would be staying for Sunday dinner since the night Derek had been arrested. The doorbell's soft chime made Scout's ears perk up, but instead of the aggressive alertness that had characterized his behavior during his police career, his tail began wagging with the controlled enthusiasm of a dog who had learned to differentiate between visitors and threats. Emma opened the door to find Linda standing on the porch, holding a small wrapped package and wearing the nervous smile of someone who was still learning how to be a mother again. "Hi, baby," Linda said softly, her voice carrying the careful tone of someone who understood that trust, once broken, had to be rebuilt one interaction at a time. Emma's response was a careful hug, not quite as enthusiastic as the ones she gave Eleanor or Scout, but warmer than the polite embraces of their earlier supervised visits. "Mom," she said simply, and both women understood that the word carried more weight now than it ever had before. Linda had changed in the months since Derek's arrest. Her dark hair was shorter, framing a face that looked younger now that the constant tension had lifted. She had left nursing temporarily, working instead as a victim advocate for other women escaping domestic violence situations. The work was challenging but healing, allowing her to transform her experience into something that could help others recognize the warning signs she had missed or ignored. Michael Torres arrived shortly after Linda, bringing his daughter Sophia and a covered dish that smelled suspiciously like his mother's famous enchiladas. The relationship between the Torres and Patterson-Wilson families had evolved into something deeper than gratitude, a chosen family bond forged in trauma but sustained by genuine affection. Sophia, now 12 and bearing a strong resemblance to her father, had become Emma's closest friend and fiercest protector. She understood trauma in ways that other children didn't, having lost her own mother to cancer, and her presence in Emma's life provided something that no amount of adult therapy could match: the companionship of another child who knew that sometimes the world took people away without warning. "Scout's getting fat," Sophia announced cheerfully as the German Shepherd bounded toward her with his usual enthusiasm. "Retirement agrees with him." Michael laughed, scratching behind Scout's ears with the familiarity of a partner who had shared danger and triumph. "He's earned the right to a few extra treats. Besides, Emma spoils him more than I ever did." The Sunday dinner ritual had become sacred in the Patterson household, a weekly reminder that families could be created through choice as much as blood. Eleanor presided over the table with the gentle authority of someone who had spent decades managing classrooms and now channeled that skill into managing the complex dynamics of healing relationships. Linda's wrapped package contained a photo album she had been working on for months, pictures of Emma's early childhood with her father David, images that Derek had hidden away and that Linda had painstakingly recovered from storage boxes and old computers. Emma turned the pages slowly, her finger tracing photographs of birthday parties and Christmas mornings and ordinary moments that had taken on profound significance in their absence. "I found the video of your first piano recital," Linda said quietly. "You were 6, and you played Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star 17 times because you forgot to stop when the song ended." Emma's laughter was soft but genuine. "I remember. Dad said I was so focused on getting it right that I forgot there was an audience." These recovered memories had become crucial to Emma's healing process. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the child psychologist who had been working with Emma since the Morrison case, had explained that trauma could steal not just the present, but also the past, making victims forget that life had ever been good or safe. Reconstructing Emma's early childhood, establishing that her first 8 years had been filled with love and security, provided a foundation for her belief that such feelings were possible again. Michael found himself studying the family photographs, thinking about the investigation that had revealed Derek's pattern of targeting families exactly like this one: single mothers, young children, the kind of domestic stability that his twisted psychology had seen as both enviable and threatening. The Morrison case had changed how the Austin Police Department approached domestic violence calls, implementing new protocols that prioritized children's safety, even when parents seemed reluctant to cooperate. Scout, as if sensing the adult conversation drifting toward difficult topics, performed one of his favorite tricks. Carefully taking Emma's napkin from her lap and carrying it to Eleanor with the solemn dignity of a dog who understood his role in maintaining household harmony. The performance never failed to make Emma giggle, and today was no exception. "He knows exactly what he's doing," Eleanor observed, accepting the napkin with mock seriousness. "This dog has been manipulating humans since the day he was born." After dinner, Emma retreated to her art corner, a space Eleanor had created in the living room with proper lighting, supplies, and a small easel where Emma could work while remaining part of family activities. Her artwork had evolved dramatically over the months, progressing from the dark, violent images that had characterized her early therapy sessions to bright, hopeful scenes that showed families of people and animals living in harmony. Today's project was a commissioned piece, a portrait of Scout that would be displayed at the Austin Police Department's annual award ceremony. The painting showed the German Shepherd in profile, his amber eyes alert but calm, his posture suggesting strength without aggression. Emma had captured something essential about Scout's nature, the quality that had made him perfect for both police work and therapy: the ability to be simultaneously protective and gentle. Linda watched her daughter work, marveling at the steady confidence in Emma's hands as she mixed colors and applied careful brushstrokes. "She's talented," she said to Eleanor, her voice carrying the wonder of a mother discovering her child's gifts. "She gets that from David," Eleanor replied. "He could draw anything, make it look exactly like life, but somehow better than life." As the afternoon stretched into evening, Michael and Sophia prepared to leave, but not before Scout performed his evening ritual of checking every room in the house, a behavior that Dr. Walsh had explained as his way of ensuring the safety of his adopted pack. The dog's inspection was thorough but calm, lacking the hypervigilance that had characterized his early retirement months. Linda's departure was more difficult, marked by the kind of careful goodbyes that acknowledged the tentative nature of rebuilding trust. But Emma's hug lasted a few seconds longer than usual, and her "See you next week, Mom," carried a warmth that hadn't been there during their earlier visits. As Eleanor tucked Emma into bed, Scout taking his customary position on the floor beside her, the elderly woman marveled at the resilience of children and the healing power of time, patience, and unconditional love. Emma's nightmares had become less frequent, her startled responses less intense, her ability to trust new people slowly improving. "Grandma Eleanor," Emma said sleepily, her hand dangling down to rest in Scout's thick fur, "do you think Scout dreams about being a police dog?" Eleanor considered the question seriously. "I think Scout dreams about the same things we all dream about: being loved, feeling safe, knowing that the people we care about are protected." Emma was quiet for a long moment, her breathing already beginning to deepen toward sleep. "I dream about Dad sometimes," she whispered. "Not sad dreams anymore, happy ones, where he gets to meet Scout and see my paintings." "I think your father would be very proud of the young lady you're becoming," Eleanor replied, her voice thick with emotion. And I think he'd be grateful to Scout for keeping you safe until you could find your way back to happiness. Outside Emma's window, Austin settled into its evening rhythm, a city full of families tucked safely into their homes. But in this particular house on Elm Street, the meaning of family had been redefined by trauma and rebuilt through love. A grandmother who had fought bureaucratic systems to reclaim her granddaughter, a mother working to earn back her daughter's trust, a police officer and his daughter who had become honorary relatives, and a retired German shepherd who had traded his badge for the more important job of being Emma's guardian angel. The story that had begun with violence and terror had transformed into something else entirely. A testament to the human capacity for healing, the power of chosen families, and the simple truth that sometimes the most important love comes from the most unexpected sources. In the morning, Emma would wake up safe. Scout would perform his morning perimeter check, Eleanor would make pancakes shaped like butterflies, and another day of normal, boring, beautifully ordinary life would begin. It was exactly the kind of happy ending that Derek Morrison, in his twisted logic, had never believed possible. And that made it all the more precious to those who had lived to see it. Dear friends, as we reach the golden years of our lives, we often find ourselves reflecting on the families we've built, the children we've raised, and the legacy of love we hope to leave behind. Emma's story reminds us that family isn't always defined by blood. Sometimes it's forged in the crucible of shared struggle and unconditional love. Eleanor Patterson, at 73, discovered that her most important role wasn't behind her but ahead of her, becoming the fierce protector her granddaughter desperately needed. Like Scout, the loyal German shepherd who broke every rule to save a child, we too have the power to be someone's guardian angel, regardless of our age. In a world that often dismisses the wisdom and strength of our generation, this story proves that our instincts, our fierce love for family, and our refusal to look the other way can literally save lives. The greatest chapters of our lives aren't written when we're young. They're written when we choose courage over comfort, action over apathy, and love over fear. Sometimes the most profound purpose comes not from what we've accomplished, but from who still needs us to fight for them. What family member or neighbor might need your protective instincts right now? Have you ever had to trust your gut feeling about someone's safety, even when others dismissed your concerns? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.